Welcome to Blind Level Tech. This isn't just accessible tech talk. This is technology on a whole new level. We're showing you just how possible it is to live the life you want.
Hello, everybody. Thank you for listening to another episode of Blind Level Tech. I am your host, Evan Starnes. This is going to be part one of a three-part, if you want to call it a mini-series, that's at least what I'm calling it, but a three-part mini-series that I recorded last Friday with Sam Proulx from Fable, and the third and final episode will be entirely dedicated to Fable, as they are a pretty large web accessibility testing company, and they have worked with such organizations as Walmart, YouTube, Meta, the list definitely goes on. So stay tuned for that part, which will be coming out in 2 weeks. But this first episode is going to focus more on the introduction to Sam Proulx, having a dad who also was blind, who worked at IBM, and we talk quite a bit about a lot of the technology that he grew up using. And honestly, sprinkled throughout this episode is a ton of assistive technology, history, and trivia. So if you have a fascination for assistive technology, and particularly old school stuff that is what some people would consider obsolete, I will never use that word, but this is definitely going to be a very fun episode for you. Also, the day that I'm editing this episode happens to be Colorado Gives Day. If you were one of the fine folks who went to coloradogives.org/organizations/aftersite and donated, we really do appreciate your contributions. If you became a recurring donor, thank you so much for your donations and your continued support of our mission. It helps us continue to produce programming like this, as well as providing audio editions of newspapers and magazines and printed material that would otherwise be inaccessible to the blind and low vision community. Lastly, and I was going to put this at the end of the episode, however, I've misplaced my archive of old text-to-speech demos, but stay tuned for a BLT Byte next week, which will have a few demos of some of the old text-to-speech synthesizers that we talked about in this episode. But enough talking, let's go ahead and begin part one with Sam Proulx. I'd like to introduce and welcome Sam Proulx to Blind Level Tech. Happy Friday, and well, I'd like to say how's it going, but I don't know, small talk and, it's kind of weird, isn't it? But
I mean, it's Friday. It's going good. What more do you want?
Exactly. That's it. Perfect. Sam, you and I, first of all, have actually the same eye condition, and you're going to be on, I believe you're going to be on the Blind Check and definitely on Blindsight to be able to talk about those things. Mm-hmm. But I just have to say, we both have Leber's congenital amaurosis. So that's kind of that's a thing. But you also were in a very rare scenario of you grew up with a dad who is also blind, and that isn't always common, but
no.
Your dad worked for IBM, and so you got to experience OS2, which I was hard to believe, I was informed, still exists today in things like ATMs, and I mean, it's been around for decades at this point, but
yep.
What was it like kind of growing up and, getting to at least experience some of that technology back then?
It was really, really great in a lot of ways. The childhood that I had was incredibly privileged because, I don't remember a time when I didn't have some kind of talking machine around me. My earliest memory is being 2 years old and my dad would just install a program that blocked the keyboard and I could just press buttons and hear the funny voice and the funny noises.
Oh, that's funny.
So, I really did grow up on and around computers with OS2, with DOS. The first computer I ever had for myself was actually the Apple II. Because my dad had a connection. They were way out of date by this time. And so, they were being like sold off cheap by school boards and stuff. And so, he got me the Apple II and the Echo, and I had all those, Planet of the Robots and all the various basic text games and things like that I could play. And the reason he did that is because, of course, it would get me to learn to type, right? Mm-hmm. Because he knew that for me, growing up, the most important childhood skill that I could learn is touch typing, because that would make me faster and more efficient at whatever I decided to do, right? It wouldn't matter if I decided to be a programmer or a writer or a public relations person, or like any job that we as completely blind people can have will depend on that skill of being able to type and being comfortable around computers. And that was something that my father came to see at a very early age. It was honestly, sometimes it was a little bit hard, because in the community of people with disabilities, I think we're getting more comfortable with it today, but like everybody has a different level of privilege and a different level of availability and education and all this stuff. And like a lot of the blind people that I would know growing up didn't have all of the advantages and opportunities that I had. Right. Mm-hmm. And so even for my father, it was hard. He started working at IBM like in the 70s. He had the first talking terminal they ever built.
Whoa.
And when he got that terminal, he was literally hauled into the vice president's office and told, "You're not allowed to tell anybody else that this exists, because we can't give them to everyone. They're too expensive." Yikes. And so that can, I'm sure you can imagine, put up a little bit of a barrier between you and the accessibility community, right? My father was always sort of had that tension. He worked, at IBM, at what was then the biggest and most influential computer company in the world. And he was fighting internally for accessibility and to make things better, while also, doing his job. He was a mainframe programmer for banks and things. But he could then not really talk about that outside, right? Because he represents IBM and Big Blue and this whole thing. And so, I know it was very challenging for him. He went to the W. Ross School for the Blind here growing up in the 50s and 60s. But then he sort of had to abandon all of those connections because he couldn't really talk to them about what he was doing,
That is really unfortunate. And I am glad to see that change is definitely more prominent today than it was, 10, 15, even maybe 30 years ago. Mm-hmm. And the fact that, in a lot of cases, accessibility is almost always either, yes, an afterthought, sometimes, and I hate to say this, I really do, a burden. And, mm-hmm. It does surprise me too that they didn't want him to talk about that accessible terminal. First of all, I'd love to hear what that thing sounded like.
It used, I don't know if you're familiar with the like Votrax.
Oh, so like the Blazy chips.
Yes.
So like the Braille and Speaks,
Yep.
Okay, that totally makes sense. So it
used
very
an
much
earlier
sounded
version
robotic.
of that chip, so it sounded like that, but slightly worse, if that's possible.
Somehow, you're right. Well, hey, you mentioned the Echo and Echo 2. Honestly, I was playing around with a virtual Apple and Apple II, and it took me like a good hour of like listening to it and finally being able to understand its pronunciations, because it was a funky little synthesizer, but it was cool.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. When I was, playing with it, I was like in grade 1 or 2, and you know how the text games, they always give you the text, and then they have at the end the little prompt, so it's the greater than symbol. Mm-hmm. Well, I thought it was saying Creator Man.
Creator Man.
And that just made sense to me. Well, yeah, I'm a man. I'm the creator man. I'm creating all this stuff.
Typing
so
the
it's asking me for input.
So
through the things, and it says creator man, and it's my turn.
Yeah, and I gotta love the text-based games too, because the fact that they are text-based just made them accessible. I'm sure you could probably play like Oregon Trail and all the other good ones. And even the American Printing House for the Blind, APH, did this really interesting little demo program that let you learn how to use the Apple II and how to adjust.
I had that on the big floppy. I think it was Larry Scootcon that wrote that.
It was, yep, and it was on a 5 1/4 inch floppy because that was before the 3.5 inch floppy disks even. That was actually the one little Apple II program. Again, it was a virtual machine, but it was the one that I got to play with. I'd sure love to be able to get my hands on an Echo, but I'd probably get a 2GS just because I want that Ensoniq chip. But you know,
there you go. There you go. But when you were talking about accessibility and how it's changed,
yes,
the big difference today is that accessibility is accessible in the way that it is becoming less and less expensive. So the reason that they didn't want him to talk about that is because, the earliest Votrax chips were just the chip was thousands of dollars, right? And so putting together a terminal that's accessible, you're looking at $40,000, $50,000. If everybody wants one, it can't be done. It's not doable.
Like millions of dollars for that company. And back in 1980s dollars, that's like probably $500,000 by nowadays. And I mean, here we are, I'm still mind blown that my Braille note taker was $5,000. And that's just a whole new perspective of accessibility, because we always, yes, it is still the case that accessible tech is a little bit more expensive than quote mainstream tech, but I do feel like it is becoming less of the case. And it's becoming less of the case because software is becoming more accessible. I mean, think about, let's say you wanted a Windows 95 computer that was accessible. Okay, well, the first thing you have to do is buy, say, DeckTalk. That's $1,200 right there, right off the bat. Then you have to pay the $1,000 for the good computer with the good graphics cards, because you can't cheap out, right? You can't get the $700 computer. And then after all that, you got to pay another $1,200 for JAWS. Right. Whereas compare that to today, the synthesizer is a piece of software on your computer. It's not a thing that you have to buy, right? The software could be Narrator. It could be NVDA. Again, not a thing that you have to buy. And that has really changed the accessibility industry, because you and I now, as advocates, first of all, we can build our own solutions if they don't exist and we have the knowledge. But second of all, when we are advocating for a company to do accessibility, we are saying, install this free tool and test your stuff, and let us help you test your stuff, and you can make some code changes and be accessible. Whereas if we were asking for accessibility in 1995, we're saying to the company, go out and spend, $10,000 to get a system and then start testing the thing. Right. And a lot of people, and I'm sure I have quite a big feeling that a lot of the stuff that we've talked about, over the past few minutes might be over some people's heads, especially like my younger audience. And a lot of people don't realize that physical synthesizers were in some cases cards or boxes. You had your DeckTalks, you had double talks. I have a DeckTalk Express somewhere too, but as do I. Nice. Right. And they were just, it was just a completely different experience, especially because in, Windows 95 days, it was based on a 16-bit architecture. So it could really only handle one sound channel at a time. So if you were playing a game that had sound, all the sound in that game was taken up, would take up the channel, that sound card, unless you were using the FM synthesizer part of it, which was a whole nother aspect. But you couldn't just run your speech through the sound card. But, nowadays, I just go to any Windows computer in the Best Buy or Micro Center, turn on Narrator, and also leave it running so that the employees have to figure out how to turn it off. 100%. Yeah. I have done that. Don't do that.
This is a diversion you might want to cut. But if you or some other people are, of an age that we have those old DeckTalk Expresses or DeckTalk Access 32, that old hardware sitting in a cupboard somewhere. And of course, it won't run on any modern computer. Well, what you can do is you can get yourself, they call them Ethernet to serial adapters. You plug that into your network. you plug the deck talk into the other end, and you can connect by telnet and send text out to the deck talk. So I did this a few years ago. I'm not running it anymore, but I had some important data and I needed to get notified whenever it changed. So I just set up the deck talk, plugged it into a speaker, and had all of the programs that were doing the monitoring just send text to deck talk whenever it changed. It was like a whole separate box, so it didn't matter if my computer was like shut down or busy or whatever. I was guaranteed to get this notification, you know?
That's amazing. Okay, I didn't know you could do that. I mean, I was thinking I have a Dell that has a serial port. I was just going to run some old VMs, and I mean, you could do that too. Like run some virtual machines, interface with the serial port, maybe run HAL or JAWS or Window Bridge. I actually kind of like Window Bridge. It's not bad.
Window Bridge was nice, yeah.
But it's kind of cool.
You can do that. Also, though, the Ethernet adapters, when you buy them, will usually come with virtual comm software. So you could install it on your modern computer, and it would think that that's a serial port, even though it's really going out over Ethernet to something else.
That's pretty cool. And I'm sure there's got to be some people in the audience that have a deck talk just sitting around, you know, assuming the battery inside hasn't died and you got to get that replaced. That could be a fun thing to do. I mean, I would even have that as just a way to like maybe integrate that with like a home assistant and have it announce what doors are open. I mean, there's so many possibilities with this thing.
Fun little project. A friend of mine had a deck talk and got one of these, and he had the bright idea that he was going to open the telnet up to the whole internet, and any of us could telnet into his system and just type things, and deck talk would say it out. I think he lasted about a week.
Yeah. Well, did anybody try to type in any of the commands to make it sing? Because that would have been hilarious if it was.
Oh yeah. I mean, you know, people just like, you know, pasting in huge blobs of text and making it sing and yell, and you could make it beep. And he only lasted with this in his apartment about a week, I think. It was a fun experiment. What would people do if I give them this?
Because that was another cool thing that the deck talks could do is, you know, yes, you could make it speak, but it was one of the only synthesizers of its time that could sing, and it could play very compressed, like 11 kilohertz audio. You could make it do DTMF tones. Like they use those things very extensively over, like for telephony, for those for auto dial systems. I mean, those things are very, very widely used. And
CNIB here in Canada used to have a system where you could dial in by phone, and I remember, you know, one of my other early memories, my father, you know, on a Sunday morning, we'd all be eating our toast, and he'd turn on the speakerphone and he'd call into the newspaper, and he'd just sit and listen to articles on the speakerphone. And so we'd all sort of be, you know, reading the newspaper as a family.
That's awesome. Yeah, even the NFB Newsline service here used deck talk for a long time, and then they switched over to NeoSpeech voices. But yeah, it's kind of cool that, you know, the amount of stuff that deck talk was present in that you don't even realize.
Mm-hmm. You know, and it's really fun because now if we look at AI and all these AI artists, I mean, effectively that's text to speech. You know, I look at some of this and I'm like, we were doing that in the 80s.
Right. And now we have, you know, like 11 labs that can try, you know, to create singing voices, and it's kind of crazy what it can do. But Suno and
blind people were doing it first, folks.
Yep. Hey, blind people also had PDAs first before, you know, because we all, you know, people love the Palm Pilots, and I had a Motorola Tungsten, and, you know, all those little touchscreen things. But the PDA actually existed back in 1987 with the original Braille and Speak, in my opinion.
100%. And blind people, I don't know if you were around for this, but we had GPS long before it came to sighted people. I had the Braille Note system. So like it had like a separate GPS receiver that you had to like mount on your shoulder, and then you like put the unit on your back, and then you had to have headphones, and it was like a whole thing. But like we as blind people, honestly, I was saying this to somebody else in conjunction with a conference event that I was doing. If you want to know what the future of technology holds, look at what blind people are doing right now.
That's a great point, because we had Sendero making their GPS technology, and eventually, HumanWare released. I know after I think the Braille Note I don't know if it was it had to have probably been either the Classic or the M Power.
It was the Classic.
And it had that ability to, you could get the navigation software installed, registered, and download a map on it, and then, use your wireless, or it wasn't wireless, use your GPS receiver to get turn-by-turn navigation, or at least get some general route planning.
Yep. Eventually,
they had the Maestro, which was like it was basically a predecessor to the Trek or Breeze and all the, the Stellar Trek and all that good stuff, and it had its own little receiver. You'd also have to clip it on your shoulder, and it was based off of a PDA. In fact, the original KNFB reader from 2006, which I got to play with, that was just literally a little, I think it was a Canon camera, point and shoot camera, on a mounting plane with a basic Windows Mobile based PDA that they'd thrown some software on. So they basically they took some existing hardware and kind of made it work for their purposes. And that was pretty common.
It really did show the future, right? We had GPS before sighted people were using it. Think about text to speech, right? They hear it all the time now in their Series and their digital assistants that I won't name to wake up every single person's digital assistant.
That'd be fun though.
But blind people have been using that since the 70s, think about the things that we're using now. Right now, blind people are really pressing for indoor navigation, for more detailed step-by-step route planning. Well, guess what self-driving cars are eventually going to need, right? Guess what warehouse and inventory tracking systems are going to eventually need? Indoor navigation technology. And so we, as blind people, historically have always been, and I think always will be, drivers of the future.
That is the best walk-away point, I've got to say, for this, because I feel like we're almost coming to at least the end of our first part. This has basically been kind of the introduction here to you, and to be honest, it all goes down to the term that I will continue to drive into the ground, into the core of the earth, of universal accessibility that benefits, yes, the community served, but the entire community at large. Meta, like the Meta Ray-Ban glasses, they're $300-something. And
look at audiobooks. Originally
audiobooks, yes,
created by folks who were blind after World War II.
For blinded veterans. Yeah.
For blinded veterans. Now it is the fastest growing literature market in the world, growing by billions of dollars a year.
Right. Like everybody's got Audible. You can go to the library, get a play away. I mean, it's just everywhere, and people listen to them in their cars while they're cleaning. I mean, if it weren't for blinded veterans that needed these audiobooks, and also reading services, have to shout those out, like AfterSight, we wouldn't have these services today that we use and that benefit us. So,
and even Audible at the very beginning, they had to have their own special Audible player because MP3 players weren't a thing.
Oh yeah.
And it would connect to your computer by, I think it was a parallel port.
It was a parallel. It was actually, no, it was serial. It was serial and had a weird dock.
Yeah, it had a weird thing. But cause there's no USB. And so you'd load up the Audible software on your computer and you do all this stuff. And guess who their number one customer was? Folks who were blind people, right? We sustained that business kind of until it got practical for everyone to just sort of wirelessly download a book on their iPhone.
Right. Because eventually Audible did get kind of, they got bought by Amazon, but they worked with Apple as well. And that's why you could buy Audible books on iTunes. Remember that female voice that you'd hear every time before an audiobook? I'm sure some of us do. And I mean, it's hard to believe the original Audible player, it wasn't very successful. And also all the audio was downsampled to about 8 kilohertz. So it sounded like you were listening over a phone, but it was the ability to listen to audiobooks on a device about the size of a box of playing cards or, something along those lines, basically. Well, goodness gracious. We have already come to, I feel like we've covered a lot in this first part. So, thank you so much for the introduction. I've really enjoyed talking about just all of the tech that you grew up using. I cannot believe, I can believe, but I can't believe I didn't realize OS 2's accessibility was a thing. And
so
it's just
OS2,
interesting to know about this stuff.
OS2, the really interesting thing about OS2 accessibility, and the reason you don't see emulators of OS2 screen readers, is because OS2, not only did it require a speech synthesizer box, so a piece of hardware that you had to have, it also required what was called the screen reader keypad. And that was because they had, Jim Thatcher and some of the folks at IBM had already anticipated the problem that we're feeling on Windows, right? Blind people run out of hotkeys. Mm-hmm. So they had a special keypad that had buttons that were only for the OS2 screen reader and that only the OS2 screen reader could use. And so you hooked this keypad into your computer, and that was how you controlled the screen reader. And then it didn't touch any of the other keyboard shortcuts, and you use the other keyboard just like a sighted person would. There were no extra commands or anything.
Right. Well, that's interesting. And I think those actually still might exist in today's day and age. I know you can go literally you can buy a keypad or even a number pad and then remap all those keys using something like Sharp keys. But the fact that technology existed way before is it's kind of interesting, and it even kind of makes me think of like the accessibility mods that they are installing in a lot of kiosks, kind of like that Target one that I talked about a couple weeks ago in a previous episode, or just any of those ordering kiosks that have the accessibility controllers. I mean, this has been an ongoing thing for decades as well.
Yeah.
Just
the
like
interesting thing about the OS2 one, though, was that like it was not a number pad. It had its own key layout. It had its own keys. You couldn't just plug it into another computer and have use it as a number pad, because it was its own thing, sort of custom designed for OS2, which was revolutionary in its way, but also kind of sad because you're never going to install OS2 on a virtual machine and get to play with a screen reader, sadly.
Yeah, unfortunately. And there's no demos out there that you can listen to. I mean, because there are demos of other things. Like I have somewhere a demo of the Echo and Echo 2 synthesizers for the Apples, but I've never gotten to see one. But yeah, you can't. If geeks like myself are curious what that stuff sounds like, you have to. I don't even know how you'd go get that perspective.
This is a big problem, and I've been wanting to do this for a long time, and I haven't done it because time is not infinite, and I do work full time at Fable, but accessibility history is the most lost and disenfranchised part of technology, and it is so sad and so heartbreaking.
It is very sad.
If you think about the Atari, there are 70 books on everything from exactly how every single chip worked to who developed it to what the game designer's favorite breakfast cereal was and how that inspired him, right? Look at the Nintendo, all just endless tomes of books written and published about that. Want to know about the accessibility of screen readers? There is nothing. Want to know about the accessibility of synthesizers, of hardware, of OS2? And
good luck.
The heartbreaking thing is we are starting to lose that knowledge. I mean, Jim Thatcher passed away, who was sort of the premier developer of the OS2 screen reader and moved on to do really critical work in Windows accessibility. And if you look at Glenn Gordon, who's stepped away now from Vespero.
Freedom Scientific, Vespero, yeah.
If you look at, even Ted Henter is not getting any younger. Nope. We're going to lose this history unless we act now. And I wish that I could be the person to have the time to put together that book. But if you're listening to this and this is really tugging on your passions, you can email these guys while they're still alive and get these oral histories and get them down and get them documented, because we're going to lose them. And when you lose history, you have to repeat history. And there are so many learnings that we could learn from them that I would hate for our industry to lose.
I am so glad that you brought that up, because I have for years been trying to kind of make my own archive of assistive technology and accessibility history myself. And I would encourage anybody out there, if you're fascinated, if this stuff fascinates you and you have contact with these folks, reach out to them. Just even if it is, it could be just writing down all the history, but even if it's just collecting audio snippets for archival purposes, definitely do that. If you have old hardware, if you've got like an old deck talk or a double talk or some Braille and Speaks, somebody even just gave me an old VersaBraille system from the 70s. Like, don't throw that stuff out. Do not throw it in the dumpsters or the landfills. That is tech that'll never exist again. And it is how we are where we are now with our smartwatches and accessible technology that's almost always accessible out of the box nowadays. We're here because of that technology from, the decades past. And
just the other day, I was trying to find documentation on the adapter text-to-speech system. Online, there is nothing.
I've not found anything.
There's nothing. Nobody, I don't know who made it. I don't know how it worked. I don't know where it came from. I don't know where it went. And like this knowledge is being lost. And yeah, if that is something you're passionate about, I mean, heck, get in touch. I can introduce you to folks and reach out to folks, even if you're just recording an oral history. Look at what the Library of Congress does with their oral histories. Just record some interviews. It doesn't even have to be professional. Just get their thoughts down, get them out there, get them documented for whoever wants to put together the book, Yes.
Well, thank you, Sam, for joining me for part 1 of this introductory episode. I sure hope that everybody out there has enjoyed listening to us kind of banter back and forth, because like I told everybody in the beginning of this episode, I mean, this is one of those times where I could just go absolute nuts. And I mean, there's just so much stuff. We could do an entire seasons of podcasts, but
so what you're saying is this podcast is being renamed Old Man Talks Tech. No,
Old Man and all over the place Dork Talks Tech. More like. Well, I hope you all enjoyed part 1 of this episode, and rest assured there are going to be multiple parts. There will be a part 2, maybe a part 3 with Sam Proulx. This will most likely be how we finish out our winter holiday, Christmas and New Year's here. And I am so happy about that, because I'm sure you all didn't want to hear, hey, we're rerunning episodes again, because I'm bored of rerunning episodes, for goodness sakes. It's far more fun, and especially during the holidays, it's just entertaining to talk about assistive tech history, anything related to it. And if that's your passion, and if you like technology and archiving technology and just learning about it, you've definitely come to the right place. And I definitely encourage anybody, if you're curious, just go out there and look at these things. Look at some of the stuff that we talked about. I mean, some of this stuff is very Googleable. And if you have any history, hold on to it as long as you can. Make duplicates and really just make sure that it continues to stay in the archives and that we don't have to repeat history once again. If you have any particular feedback or suggestions for future topics or questions or any sort of comments, of course, you are more than welcome to email feedback@aftersight.org. Or, of course, you can give us a call at 720-712-8856 and leave a voicemail, and we'll respond to it. We can play your message on the air if you like. Maybe it'll be a topic for a future episode. So, with that being said, I've been your host, Evan Starnes. Thank you for listening to Blind Level Tech. Stay tuned for part 2 with Sam Proulx coming out next week.